Welcome to the Word Room. I'm so excited you're here. We're going through all the chapters of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, breaking down the summary of each chapter, some key takeaways, and what it tells us about God. Today, we're on Genesis chapter 8. This is the chapter where Noah comes out of the ark and the flood has finished. You don't want to miss what this tells us about God. Stick around to the end. Let's go. All right, let's get right into Genesis chapter 8 and the summary. So some important things happen. First, the flood waters begin to recede in this chapter. So it talks about how the flood recedes and where the ark ends up landing and tells us all the details about the flood ending and Noah coming out of the ark. That's the primary point of this chapter. Noah, during this time when the floodwaters recede, he sends out a raven and 2 doves from the ark to see if there was enough dry land so that him and his family could leave the ark. And then we see God call them out of the ark when the earth was dry. So finally the floodwaters get down far enough, and God sends Noah and his family out of the ark. It's dry enough for them to go. Noah immediately, one of the first things he does coming out of the ark is to build an altar to worship God. And after building an altar and sacrificing to God, God promises never to curse the ground or destroy any living thing again. And that's the covenant or promise he makes with Noah immediately after the flood. So 5 key takeaways from this chapter. Number 1, the ark landed on Mount Ararat. And this is important because we've actually found Noah's ark, or believed to have found Noah's ark, directly on Mount Ararat. And that's what the Bible says. So if the archaeological evidence, which tend to indicate that this is Noah's ark that we have found, holds up, it confirms the Bible story here. It's just very, very important. So the ark landed on Mount Ararat. Also, Noah sent a raven out of the window of the ark, but it did not return. So there was a window in the ark. Noah opened it and sent the raven out. But the raven did not return. We're going to look at it in just a moment. The dove, however, he sends out a dove, and the dove did return. So why would the raven not return, but the dove did return? It literally says the dove returned because there was no land for it to land on, or not enough land for it to land on. But the raven didn't come back. Where'd the raven go? Well, ravens are animals that feed on flesh, and they would eat off the rotten corpses. So it's very likely that the raven went out and there were bodies still floating in the water. And they landed on those and went from body to body eating. But doves don't do that. Doves would eat the plants and the other types of smaller animals like worms and things like that, and nothing that would be a dead carcass. And as a result, the dove had nowhere to go, but the raven did. The dove, he sends out 3 times. The first time, it came back because there was no dry land for it to land on. The second time, which was 7 days later, it was sent out again. This time it came back as well, but it had an olive leaf in its mouth. Now, it's not an olive branch. You'll see these images of a dove with an olive branch in its mouth. A dove couldn't pluck an olive branch off of the tree. Nor would it necessarily be strong enough to carry the olive branch while flying. It had a leaf. That's what the Bible says. It had an olive leaf. So it comes back. There's obviously at this point plants that are growing or starting to grow back. And there's scientific reasons to understand why plants survived the flood or could have survived the flood and how long it takes them to grow back. There's also just the simple fact that God could have worked within the natural processes supernaturally. But the plants are growing back. He brings an olive leaf. And then the third time the dove is sent out, it doesn't return. And at that point, Noah knew there was, dry ground has reappeared. There was enough land. We can leave the ark. But he didn't he didn't leave the ark because the dove didn't come back. Actually, God commanded him to leave the ark, or told him he could leave the ark. And that's when he left the ark. Number 4, Noah was on the ark for almost a year, but after the dove did not return, they could leave the ark. And Noah, when he left the ark, made an altar and sacrificed to God. And number 5, God makes a covenant with Noah, promising never to curse the ground for man's sake or destroy every living thing again even though it says the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. In other words, God said, while I did preserve you, Noah, and while I did save you because you were the one just man on the earth, man is still in a fallen, sinful nature. And from the time he's a child, his heart is evil. His heart is evil to the core. But I won't destroy the planet again as a result of that, was God's promise to Noah. So 5 things we learn about God from this passage. Number 1, the chapter starts out by saying, and God remembered Noah. Now, this isn't a remember as in God forgot about Noah and then, oh yeah, I forgot Noah's over here on the ark. No, this word remember literally means to bring to the focus of your mind. So during that time period, God's dealing with flooding the earth, all this is happening, and then God shifts his focus back to Noah on the ark, and then says, oh, I remember Noah, or my focus goes back to Noah. We want to redeem Noah's family and make sure that he can get off this ark. So God didn't forget about Noah. He was just shifting his focus back to Noah. And I think that's important, that God remembers us, that God puts us at the forefront of his mind, that we are on his mind. And that's important to remember, that God calls us to mind and he cares about us. 2, he allows us to put forth effort. I think this is a very interesting thing about God. God ends up telling Noah that he can leave the ark. But God doesn't do that until Noah has put forth the effort of sending out these birds to determine if there is dry land. Noah could have done nothing, and God would have still been able to tell him whether or not there was any dry land and that when they could leave the ark. But God, who commanded him to put in the window, which was for the purpose of sending these birds out, which is the only time we'd see the window being used, God told him to put in the window for this purpose, and yet God could have just told him when there was dry land. But God allowed Noah to put forth the effort, and then God, when Noah put forth the effort, combined his word with that, and that is what led Noah to being off the ark. Number 3, God works within natural processes. So God sends a strong wind to begin to cause the waters to recede, and then it takes time for the waters to recede before Noah can get off the ark. Isn't that interesting that God could have just snapped or said or spoke and all the water just disappears? But he didn't. He waited until the natural process. He allowed Noah to stay on the ark through the natural process of the water receding. Now, that doesn't mean God didn't involve himself supernaturally. God sent the wind. God, may have supernaturally been involved in the plants coming back. But he uses natural processes and then just mixes his supernatural in with the natural instead of just doing everything supernatural. There's a reason for that. God created creation, right? All of creation, God created. He designed the natural processes to work. And so he works within those natural processes. Number 4, God responds to sacrifice. It says that the sweet savoring smell of the burnt offering rises before God, and it is only then that God responds as a result of that sacrifice to say he would never destroy all living kind off the planet again, nor would he curse the ground again. So that's very, very important that God responds to sacrifice. And finally, number 5, God is a God of covenant and promises, that God makes a covenant with Noah and promises Noah. God, when he makes a promise, will always keep his promise. So God is a God of covenant. He's a God of promises, and those promises will never be broken. 5 things we learned about God in this chapter. You want to dig deeper? Go study this chapter, and I will see you in the next chapter.